In the early decades of the 21st century, the world was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Technology was advancing at a breakneck speed, connecting people from every corner of the globe. Cities were growing taller, streets busier, and communication almost instantaneous. On one hand, this was a time of incredible innovation. People could talk, trade, and travel in ways that previous generations could only dream about. On the other hand, it was also a time when the fragility of human life was becoming painfully clear. Natural disasters, climate change, political tension, and the rise of powerful weapons all combined to create an environment where humanity was constantly walking a thin line between normal life and sudden crisis. Amid this tense and ever-changing world, there was a growing awareness that humanity was not as safe as it once believed. For centuries, humans had faced wars, plagues, and natural disasters, and each time, societies adapted and survived. But now, the threats were different. They were faster, smarter, and far more destructive. Countries had developed weapons that could wipe out entire cities in moments. Hurricanes and floods were growing stronger every year. Viruses could spread across continents in days. In the middle of all this, governments and organizations began to realize that if humanity wanted to survive, it would have to come together in ways it had never done before. People could no longer afford to act in isolation or ignore problems happening far away. The survival of everyone depended on collaboration, foresight, and sometimes sheer determination. That was in this environment that Dr. Elias Hartman became a central figure in what would later be seen as one of the defining moments of human resilience. Hartman was a man who had always believed in the power of preparation and intelligence. Unlike many military strategists who relied solely on force, he emphasized understanding the enemy, predicting natural disasters, and thinking several steps ahead. He spent decades studying patterns, how conflicts began, how they escalated, and how societies responded under pressure. To him, the challenges of the modern era were not insurmountable, but they required a new approach, one that combined human ingenuity with advanced technology. People around him saw him as relentless, perhaps even obsessive, but his foresight was unmatched. He understood that the world was entering a period where small mistakes could have catastrophic consequences, and he dedicated himself to ensuring humanity would not face those consequences unprepared. The world around Hartman was a mixture of awe-inspiring achievements and quiet, dangerous vulnerabilities. On one side, there were cities lit up by the glow of millions of lights, technological marvels that could track storms in real time, and armies equipped with intelligence-driven strategies. On the other side, there were warnings that no one could ignore: rising sea levels threatening coastal cities, political tensions simmering between long-standing rivals, and news reports of sudden attacks or disasters that left millions of people vulnerable. For the average person, life continued with its usual rhythm: work, school, family. But beneath that rhythm, the sense of uncertainty was always present. No one could guarantee that tomorrow would be safe, and that unease was a silent but constant companion. Dr. Hartman often thought about what it would mean if the world was suddenly forced to face a threat that no single nation could handle alone. He spent countless hours running simulations, imagining different scenarios where humanity would have to respond not just with courage, but with precision and coordination. One evening, as he watched news reports of yet another storm causing widespread damage, he realized that the world's current preparedness was inadequate. Countries were still thinking in terms of their own borders and priorities, not in terms of the survival of humanity as a whole. If a truly catastrophic event occurred, no single military or government could respond quickly enough. Lives would be lost, infrastructure destroyed, and the very fabric of society could be shaken. That thought, frightening as it was, only strengthened Hartman's resolve. He began advocating for a new kind of alliance, one that would go beyond politics, culture, or history, a unified approach to protecting the entire planet. It was not an easy task. Nations had long histories of distrust. Some had fought wars against each other, others had competing interests, and almost all were wary of sharing advanced technology or intelligence. Yet, Hartman believed that the time for old grudges had passed. He argued that the future demanded collaboration, and he used clear, logical reasoning to convince even the most skeptical leaders. The world is smaller than ever before, he would say. A storm in one continent can disrupt food supplies in another. A virus can travel faster than any border. A rogue weapon in the wrong hands can destroy millions. We either prepare together or we fail together or we fail together. His words were not empty speeches. He backed them with research, simulations, and case studies that made it difficult for anyone to ignore the truth. Slowly, his efforts began to have an effect. International meetings that once focused on trade disputes and political rivalries started to shift toward discussions of disaster preparedness and coordinated defense strategies. New organizations were created that brought together experts from science, military, healthcare, and emergency management. Countries that had been enemies in the past now found themselves sitting in the same rooms, sharing strategies and technologies. It was not perfect, and progress was slow, but it was a start. The seeds of what would become a global effort to face unprecedented threats were being planted, and Hartman was at the center of it all, quietly pushing, negotiating, and reminding everyone of the stakes. But even as the world slowly moved toward cooperation, life for ordinary people continued. Families went about their daily routines, unaware of the behind-the-scenes planning happening in secure government facilities and international headquarters. Children went to school, workers commuted, and people celebrated holidays and festivals. Yet, there was a subtle shift in the air. People began to notice unusual weather patterns, news of distant conflicts reached them faster, and the idea that their world might suddenly change became a topic of conversation. In some ways, this unease mirrored the very essence of the age. Life was normal, yet constantly under threat. The challenge, Hartman knew, was to ensure that when the threat finally arrived, humanity would not be caught off guard by the time the first real warning signs appeared. Hartman and his colleagues were already laying the groundwork for a response. It was like watching a massive chess game unfold, with every move carefully planned to anticipate the next. They established communication networks that could function even if major infrastructure was destroyed. Emergency response teams were trained to work across borders, using shared protocols that had never existed before. Advanced technologies, drones, satellites, artificial intelligence, and advanced weaponry were integrated into a global defense strategy designed not just to fight, but to protect civilians, maintain order, and save lives. It was an ambitious plan, one that required trust, resources, and the willingness to act decisively. But Hartman had a vision, and he believed in humanity's capacity to rise to the occasion. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this phase was not just the preparation, but the growing realization that survival would depend on more than just machines or weapons. It would depend on human courage, ingenuity, and the ability to make tough decisions under pressure. Hartman often reminded his team that technology could only go so far. It was people who would ultimately determine the outcome, from military generals to medical teams, from engineers to volunteers. Everyone would need to step up and work together. The story of survival, he believed, was a story of unity, determination, and the relentless will to protect life against overwhelming odds. That's the background for what was about to unfold. This period was both tense and fascinating. It was a time when humanity stood at the edge of possibility, capable of incredible achievements, yet constantly aware of its vulnerabilities. The world had never been so connected, yet so fragile. People had the tools to prevent disaster, but only if they acted with wisdom and cooperation. And in this delicate balance, the story of humanity's resilience began not with battles fought in the open, but with careful planning, careful thought, and the slow building of a global network ready to respond when the call finally came. It was a world on high alert, a world where ordinary life continued amid extraordinary danger. The background established the stakes, introduced the key players, and revealed the enormous challenge ahead. Every action, every plan, and every conversation during this time contributed to humanity's readiness. And though people did not yet know it, the moment when the world would need to answer the call was approaching. That call would test every lesson learned, every relationship built, and every ounce of human courage. In this phase, the foundations were light not just for survival, but for the story of how humanity, when united, could face even the most relentless firepower with determination, intelligence, and heart. Asterisk, as the world continued to change at a rapid pace, the signs of imminent danger became increasingly clear. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, but the experts who had been monitoring global patterns noticed anomalies that could not be ignored, where the systems behaved in unpredictable ways. Cyber attacks were growing more sophisticated, and intelligence reports hinted at forces preparing for aggressive action. It was as if the world had shifted from a state of uneasy calm to a period of quiet tension, where every small event could signal a larger threat. Ordinary people went about their daily lives, unaware that the foundations of global security were being tested in ways they had never imagined. Governments, however, were alert, quietly mobilizing resources and making preparations that would soon prove essential. Dr. Elias Hartman and his team were at the forefront of this awareness. They spent hours poring over reports, analyzing data, and running simulations. Each piece of information told them something important. The threat was real. It was imminent, and it was unlike anything humanity had faced before. Hartman understood that responding to this situation would require coordination on an unprecedented scale. Nations could no longer act as independent entities. Traditional rivalries, political disagreements, and historical grudges would have to be set aside, at least temporarily, if humanity wanted any chance of protecting itself. This idea was met with skepticism in some quarters. Leaders who were used to thinking only in terms of national interest found the notion of global cooperation difficult to accept. Yet, the urgency of the situation gradually broke down those barriers. As the first real indicators of trouble appeared, governments began taking action. Military units were placed on high alert, strategic locations were fortified, and emergency response teams were briefed on potential scenarios. Intelligence agencies intensified their surveillance, looking for signs of preparation or movement that might indicate an impending attack. Every piece of data was analyzed meticulously. Troop movements, unusual shipments, communications between suspicious organizations. It was a massive effort, and every country involved realized that the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. The situation demanded not just defensive measures but proactive strategies that could prevent the crisis from spiraling out of control. At the same time, scientists and engineers were called upon to contribute in ways they had never imagined. New technologies were being developed at a rapid pace, from advanced surveillance systems and early warning networks to experimental defense mechanisms capable of neutralizing threats before they could escalate. Teams worked around the clock, often sleeping in labs or war rooms, fueled by the knowledge that the world's survival could depend on their innovations. For many of them, the work was both exhilarating and terrifying. The sense of responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential for failure. A single miscalculation could have consequences that would affect millions of lives. Still, there was a collective determination that kept everyone. Gunja shared understanding that this was a moment in history when ordinary people were being asked to do extraordinary things. One of the most challenging aspects of this phase was the coordination required between nations. Countries that had long viewed each other with suspicion were now sharing intelligence and resources. Military strategies had to be harmonized across borders, and communication channels had to be secure yet fast enough to respond in real time. It was a delicate balance. Miscommunication or delays could result in catastrophic outcomes. To facilitate this cooperation, Hartman and his team set up an international command network, bringing together experts from multiple fields: military officers, disaster response teams, scientists, and policymakers. This network allowed decisions to be made quickly, resources to be deployed efficiently, and information to flow without the usual bureaucratic delays that often hindered urgent action. The early situation was marked by a tense sense of anticipation. People could feel that something significant was on the horizon, even if they didn't fully understand what it would be. Media outlets began reporting unusual events, small but alarming attacks on infrastructure, sudden natural disasters in areas previously considered safe, and hints of escalating conflicts in remote regions. While these events were isolated at first, their cumulative effect created a sense of unease. Citizens began to notice the heightened presence of military personnel, emergency drills in schools, and government advisories urging caution. For many, it was a subtle shift from normalcy to vigilance, a reminder that the world they knew was being challenged in ways that required attention and action. In cities around the world, preparations were underway to handle potential emergencies. Hospitals stockpiled supplies, transportation systems created contingency plans, and communication networks were strengthened to ensure that critical information could reach everyone, even in times of chaos. Emergency shelters were mapped out, and evacuation protocols were refined. While these measures were designed to protect civilians, they also highlighted the gravity of the situation. No one could ignore the fact that the threats facing humanity were serious enough to require large-scale mobilization. Families began having conversations about safety, communities organized volunteer groups, and ordinary citizens started to take small but meaningful steps to prepare for what might come. The complexity of this early situation extended beyond physical preparations. It also involved a psychological component. Leaders and experts recognized that fear could spread faster than any attack, disrupting social order and making it more difficult to respond effectively. Therefore, part of the strategy involved reassuring populations, providing accurate information, and avoiding panic. It was a delicate task, balancing the need for urgency with the need for calm. Public briefings were carefully scripted, emphasizing both preparedness and resilience. Schools and workplaces conducted drills, not as a source of fear, but as a way to empower people with knowledge and confidence. Every detail mattered because, in a situation like this, even small mistakes could amplify the danger. Meanwhile, the threat itself was becoming more defined. Intelligence suggested that hostile forces were gathering, coordinating in ways that indicated both strategy and intent. The scale of their preparation suggested that this was not a minor skirmish or isolated attack. It was a planned, large-scale operation designed to challenge humanity in every possible way. Hartman's simulations indicated that failure to respond effectively could result in widespread destruction, loss of life, and the collapse of essential infrastructure. It was a sobering realization, but one that reinforced the necessity of rapid, decisive, and coordinated action. Alliances began to solidify. Countries that had once been adversaries now found common ground. Joint task forces were formed, combining the strengths of each nation. Military training exercises were conducted with international participants, preparing troops to work seamlessly with allies they had once viewed with suspicion. Logistics and supply chains were integrated to ensure that resources could be deployed wherever needed. It was an ambitious undertaking, one that required trust, discipline, and flexibility. The early situation was essentially a test of humanity's ability to unite under pressure, and so far, the results were promising. Asterisk satellites monitored movements and environmental changes in real time. Drones provided aerial intelligence in areas too dangerous for human personnel, and advanced communication systems allowed for instantaneous coordination between continents. Artificial intelligence assisted in analyzing vast amounts of data, predicting possible threats, and recommending strategic responses. It was an era in which human decision-making and machine intelligence worked hand in hand, each enhancing the other's capabilities. The combination of technology and human ingenuity created a system that was far more effective than anything previous generations could have imagined. Despite all the preparation, the situation remained tense and uncertain. Every alert, every unusual report, and every test of the defense systems served as a reminder of how high the stakes were. People at the top of the command chain, including Hartman, knew that while the early situation involved planning and readiness, it could quickly escalate into a full-blown crisis. The world was essentially on the edge of a precipice, and even a small misstep could trigger disaster. Yet, there was also a sense of hope. The very act of preparing, organizing, and cooperating gave humanity a chance to face whatever was coming with strength, strategy, and resilience. The early situation had accomplished something remarkable. It had transformed isolated concerns into a coordinated global effort. It had forced nations to set aside differences in the face of a common challenge. It had demonstrated the importance of foresight, planning, and adaptability. And most importantly, it had prepared humanity, at least in part, for the storm that was on the horizon. While ordinary people continued their daily routines, a silent but powerful network of experts, leaders, and volunteers was ready to act when the moment arrived. The early situation had set the stage for the coming conflict, ensuring that when the real test of humanity's courage and determination arrived, the world would not be caught unprepared. Asterisk, though filled with tension and uncertainty, was also inspiring. It showed the best aspects of human nature, the ability to learn, adapt, and work together even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. It highlighted the importance of planning and foresight while acknowledging the limits of individual nations or organizations, and it reminded everyone involved, from the highest-ranking officials to the ordinary citizens preparing at home, that survival required collective effort, courage, and relentless dedication. The early situation, in many ways, was a rehearsal for history, a rehearsal that would shape the outcome of events to come. Humanity had already demonstrated its willingness to respond with focus, collaboration, and determination. The stage was set for the next chapter, where the rising conflict would test every plan, every alliance, and every ounce of human resolve. The early situation had done more than prepare for disaster. It had proven that when faced with a looming threat, humans could mobilize, adapt, and rise to the challenge with unprecedented unity. Asterisk, the calm before the storm was over. The subtle signs that had worried experts for months began turning into clear and undeniable actions. Small, isolated attacks started happening across multiple regions, signaling that the looming threat was no longer theoretical, it was very real. These early incidents were not devastating on their own, but they were enough to shake governments, military leaders, and civilians alike. The world began to understand that it was entering a period where the stakes were higher than ever before. Ordinary life continued, but beneath the surface, a tension grew that could be felt by anyone paying attention. There was a sense that something monumental was about to happen, and every preparation, every strategy, and every early warning system would soon be tested to its limits. Dr. Elias Hartman and his team had anticipated that such escalation might occur, but even they were struck by the scale and intensity of the unfolding events. Reports arrived almost constantly, cities experiencing unexplained power failures, communications networks disrupted, supply lines compromised, and sudden, violent skirmishes occurring in regions previously considered safe. These incidents, while localized at first, hinted at a much larger, coordinated effort by hostile forces. Hartman knew that what the world was facing was not random. It was calculated, organized, and relentless. The enemy had studied humanity's vulnerabilities and was now exploiting them in ways that left no room for hesitation as the rising conflict unfolded. Governments across the globe moved from a state of preparedness to active response. Military forces were deployed not only to defend strategic locations but also to support civilian populations. Soldiers, engineers, and first responders worked side by side to fortify cities, secure critical infrastructure, and ensure that emergency services could continue to operate. In addition to conventional forces, special units trained in rapid response tactics and counterintelligence were dispatched to high-risk areas. These efforts required unprecedented coordination, as multiple nations had to align their strategies to prevent overlapping actions and avoid friendly fire or miscommunication. It was a delicate balancing act, requiring skill, trust, and real-time decision-making on a massive scale. The rising conflict also brought technology to the forefront. Advanced surveillance systems monitored both urban and remote areas, tracking movements and analyzing patterns to anticipate enemy actions. Drones flew tirelessly over cities, rivers, and forests, relaying live footage to command centers where analysts could identify threats before they materialized. Artificial intelligence played a critical role in processing the enormous amounts of data generated by these systems, helping to predict where attacks might occur and how to respond most effectively. Yet, despite all this technology, human decision-making remained central. Machines could provide guidance, but it was the judgment, courage, an experience of human leaders that ultimately determined how each situation was handled. The civilian population began to feel the tension more acutely as the conflict escalated. While governments and military units worked tirelessly to maintain security, ordinary citizens could not ignore the signs. News reports highlighted attacks, sudden evacuations, and emergency measures. Streets that were once busy with everyday activity now sometimes saw soldiers patrolling or emergency vehicles rushing to incidents. People began taking extra precautions, stockpiling supplies, checking emergency kits, and creating family plans for evacuation or shelter. Even in the midst of fear and uncertainty, communities found ways to come together, offering support and reassurance to neighbors who were struggling to cope with the growing danger. One of the most challenging aspects of the rising conflict was the unpredictability of the enemy. Attacks were not only frequent but highly strategic. Hostile forces targeted critical infrastructure, aiming to disrupt transportation, communication, and power systems. They used tactics designed to create confusion and slow down response efforts. Every successful attack created a ripple effect, making it harder for emergency responders to reach affected areas and for military units to coordinate effectively. It was a high-stakes chess game, with every move carefully calculated to exploit weaknesses and test the limits of humanity's preparedness. Hartman and his team responded by constantly adapting their strategies, revising deployment plans, and ensuring that backup systems were in place in case primary defenses failed. As the conflict intensified, the need for international cooperation became more urgent. No single country could handle the mounting pressure alone. Joint operations were launched, combining the strengths of multiple nations to create a unified defense. Military exercises that had been conducted months earlier in preparation now became real operations, as forces worked together to repel attacks, secure supply lines, and provide humanitarian aid. Communication between allied nations was continuous, with updates flowing in real time to ensure that every action was coordinated and effective. Trust, once fragile, became a necessity. Leaders who had previously doubted the value of collaboration now realized that unity was the only way to prevent catastrophic losses amid the chaos. Some regions became symbolic battlegrounds where the intensity of the conflict was most visible. Coastal cities were hit with both conventional attacks and unexpected environmental hazards, testing the ability of defense systems to respond simultaneously to multiple threats. Supply routes were cut off, forcing quick thinking and improvisation to deliver food, medicine, and equipment to those in need. Hospitals and shelters were overwhelmed at times, yet the collaboration between international teams, local authorities, and volunteers helped maintain order and save countless lives. In these areas, the rising conflict was tangible, a mix of fear, courage, and relentless human effort playing out in real time. Hartman's leadership became crucial during this phase. His experience, foresight, and calm under pressure allowed him to make decisions that saved lives and maintained strategic advantage. He coordinated with military generals, intelligence officers, scientists, and political leaders, ensuring that every resource was used effectively. Even in moments when the situation seemed overwhelming, he reminded teams that every action mattered and that humanity had already proven it could rise to challenges with intelligence and determination. His guidance was not only tactical but also moral. He inspired confidence and focus in people who were facing a world filled with uncertainty and danger. The rising conflict also exposed the human cost of the crisis. Lives were lost, infrastructure damaged, and communities disrupted. Families were displaced, businesses destroyed, and entire neighborhoods left in ruins. Despite these hardships, stories of heroism and resilience emerged everywhere. Ordinary people took extraordinary risks to help others. Soldiers went beyond their duties to protect civilians. Volunteers organized relief efforts even when conditions were dangerous. The conflict tested humanity's endurance, but it also revealed the strength of compassion, courage, and solidarity. Each act of bravery, no matter how small, contributed to the larger effort to withstand the enemy's relentless push. The enemy did not follow predictable patterns, and static strategies could not succeed. Hartman emphasized the importance of flexibility, encouraging teams to improvise and adjust tactics based on real-time developments. Units learned to respond to sudden attacks, reroute supplies, and protect civilians under changing conditions. Technology, while powerful, was most effective when paired with human ingenuity. This combination of planning, innovation, and adaptability became the backbone of the response, enabling humanity to hold its ground even as the conflict escalated. As the rising conflict continued, the world began to understand the true scale of the threat. It was no longer about isolated attacks or local skirmishes. It was about a comprehensive challenge to humanity's survival. The enemy's coordination, persistence, and firepower demonstrated that this was a struggle of unprecedented magnitude. At the same time, humanity's response grew stronger. International alliances deepened, technologies advanced further, and people everywhere, military and civilian alike, found ways to rise above fear and contribute to the collective effort. This phase of the story highlighted both the danger and the potential. showing that when tested, humans could meet extraordinary challenges with ingenuity, courage, and unity. The psychological dimension of the rising conflict was also significant. Fear and uncertainty were constant companions, but so was determination. Leaders, strategists, and ordinary citizens had to maintain focus even when the situation seemed chaotic. Panic could have been as destructive as any enemy attack. So efforts to maintain morale, provide accurate information, and inspire resilience were as critical as deploying weapons or reinforcing defenses. Communities found strength in organization, communication, and shared purpose, proving that human resilience could be cultivated even in the darkest moments. Humanity had learned important lessons about coordination, adaptability, and endurance. The rising conflict had pushed people and systems to their limits, revealing both vulnerabilities and extraordinary capacities for response. It had tested plans, alliances, and technologies, preparing the world for the even more intense challenges that were yet to come. While damage and loss were unavoidable, the collective effort to respond effectively strengthened global collaboration and demonstrated that when faced with relentless pressure, humanity could stand firm, strategize, and act decisively. This period set the stage for the breaking point, the moment when the full force of the enemy would strike, and humanity would be pushed to its absolute limits. The rising conflict had not only revealed the enemy's intentions but had also strengthened the world's defenses, sharpened coordination, and tested the courage and resilience of every person involved. It was a pivotal moment in the story, where preparation met action, and where the determination to survive became as critical as any weapon or strategy. Humanity showed that even under relentless attack, with fear and uncertainty looming, it was possible to respond with focus, unity, and intelligence. The rising conflict was a proving ground, a crucible that would shape the outcome of what was coming. It demonstrated that while danger could escalate rapidly, careful planning, international cooperation, and human ingenuity could create a chance, not just to survive but to push back against forces that threatened the very existence of civilization. Every action taken, every decision made, and every act of courage during this phase would become a foundation for what was to follow, laying the groundwork for humanity's ultimate test. The situation that had been building for months finally reached a tipping point. The small, isolated attacks, the skirmishes, the warnings, and the early confrontations were no longer enough to prepare humanity for what was coming. The enemy, after testing defenses and probing for weaknesses, unleashed a coordinated assault of unprecedented scale. Entire regions were suddenly under threat, with cities and critical infrastructure targeted simultaneously. For the first time, it became clear that this was not a war that could be won with isolated victories or careful planning alone. Humanity faced a moment where everything would be tested: the limits of technology, strategy, courage, and endurance. Dr. Elias Hartman and his team watched the situation unfold with a mix of concern and determination. All of their planning, simulations, and preparations had led to this very moment. For months they had warned that humanity would eventually face a crisis capable of overwhelming traditional defenses, and now, that prediction was coming true. Reports began pouring in from multiple regions, each detailing attacks more intense than the last. Power grids failed, communication networks were disrupted, transportation systems were paralyzed, and supplies of food, medicine, and essential resources were threatened. Civilians were trapped in areas under assault, and emergency response teams struggled to reach them. It was a crisis on a scale that had never been seen before, and the world held its collective breath, knowing that the coming hours and days would define the course of history. That the first wave of the breaking point came with precision and speed. Coastal cities experienced attacks on their ports and power stations, leaving millions without electricity and access to basic services. Air and naval operations by hostile forces created chaos, preventing reinforcements from reaching critical locations. Inland transportation hubs were sabotaged, making it nearly impossible to move people, supplies, or equipment quickly. Cyber attacks simultaneously disabled emergency systems, causing confusion and panic. It was a masterstroke of coordination by the enemy, designed to test humanity's ability to respond under pressure. And yet, despite the scale and intensity of the attack, Hartman's preparation and foresight ensured that humanity was not completely unprepared. Command centers across the world went into overdrive. Every strategy, every contingency plan, and every previously rehearsed protocol was activated simultaneously. Military units moved to defend key targets, often fighting in unfamiliar terrain and under constant pressure. Advanced defense systems, which had been in development for years, were deployed with incredible speed. Drones patrolled skies and borders, relaying real-time information to strategists and commanders. Cybersecurity experts worked tirelessly to prevent further disruptions, while engineers raced to repair damaged infrastructure before it could affect more civilians. This was a moment where preparation, technology, and human will collided in a desperate bid to hold back the tide of destruction. Civilians, meanwhile, found themselves facing the reality of the conflict in ways they had never imagined. Families huddled in shelters. Emergency services tried to coordinate evacuations, and local communities worked together to protect one another. Fear was everywhere, but so was courage. Ordinary people took extraordinary risks, moving through dangerous areas to rescue neighbors, deliver food and water, and assist medical teams. Volunteers formed ad hoc response units, guided by the instructions of trained professionals but fueled by sheer determination. The breaking point was not just a test of strategy and technology, it was a test of humanity itself, and people everywhere were rising to meet the challenge. The scale of coordination required during this phase was staggering. Nations that had once been competitors or rivals now functioned as a single, integrated network. Military units, emergency services, medical teams, and logistical operations were synchronized across borders. Communication lines were kept open through multiple channels to prevent any breakdown in coordination. Leaders had to make split-second decisions, weighing risks to civilians, troops, and infrastructure against the necessity of taking decisive action. Every choice carried enormous consequences, and every mistake could be catastrophic. Yet, even in the chaos, humanity's ability to work together and adapt proved to be its greatest strength. The psychological strain on those involved cannot be overstated. Soldiers, responders, and civilians alike faced constant danger and uncertainty. Sleep was often impossible, food and water scarce in some areas, and the constant threat of attacks created a pervasive sense of tension. Yet, even under these extreme conditions, individuals found ways to persevere. Hartman emphasized resilience and focus, reminding everyone that panic would only amplify the threat. Training, preparation, and the shared sense of purpose helped people endure what might have otherwise seemed unbearable. Stories of heroism emerged at every level, from young volunteers helping in shelters to commanders making daring maneuvers to save entire cities from being overrun. One of the most critical aspects of the breaking point was the simultaneous pressure on multiple fronts. Attacks were not limited to one location or type of threat. They were layered, complex, and relentless. Natural disasters, exacerbated by enemy tactics, struck simultaneously with conventional attacks. Floods, fires, and structural collapses challenged emergency teams, while military forces had to divide attention between defending civilians and engaging the enemy. In some areas, the combination of physical destruction and psychological warfare created almost unbearable conditions. But again, preparation and coordination proved vital. Systems that had been tested in simulations were now being used in real-world conditions, and while not perfect, they saved countless lives. Technology played a central role in human response. Satellite imaging provided a real-time overview of affected regions, helping command centers prioritize where resources were needed most. Drones and autonomous vehicles assisted in reconnaissance, supply delivery, and search and rescue operations. Artificial intelligence processed massive amounts of information, predicting the enemy's next moves and suggesting tactical responses. Yet, despite all these advancements, it was human judgment that made the difference. Commanders, engineers, and volunteers had to make quick decisions in unpredictable conditions, often relying on intuition, experience, and courage, as much as data and algorithms. The breaking point demonstrated that while technology could enhance human capability, survival ultimately depended on the people who used it. As the crisis reached its peak, the enemy intensified efforts in an attempt to break humanity's defenses completely. Entire cities faced coordinated attacks, and some regions experienced simultaneous failures in infrastructure, communication, and logistics. The pressure was immense, and for a moment it seemed that the combined efforts of humanity might not be enough. Yet, this very moment of extreme challenge highlighted what humanity was capable of under pressure. Troops worked tirelessly to repel advances. Volunteers improvised solutions to critical problems, and global coordination ensured that resources reached where they were most needed. In the chaos, humanity demonstrated not only resilience but ingenuity, creativity, and determination. Civilians played a remarkable role in this phase. While governments and military units focused on strategic objectives, ordinary people took the initiative to protect themselves and their communities. Makeshift shelters were created, local networks communicated updates, and community members assisted one another in ways that formal organizations could not always achieve. The breaking point was not only a test of top-down strategies but also a testament to bottom-up resilience. It showed that survival depended not just on centralized planning but also on the ability of individuals and communities to act decisively in the moment. Dr. Hartman's leadership was central. Throughout the breaking point, he coordinated international efforts, made strategic decisions under extreme pressure, and provided guidance that balanced caution with bold action. His calm demeanor and analytical approach reassured those around him, helping maintain focus even when events seemed overwhelming. Hartman also emphasized the moral dimension of the conflict, reminding everyone that the ultimate goal was not simply to repel attacks but to preserve human life, protect communities, and uphold the values that defined humanity. His vision inspired confidence, discipline, and determination, proving that strong leadership could turn desperation into organized and effective action. Despite the intensity of the crisis, humanity began to find ways to turn the tide. The early chaos revealed weaknesses in enemy tactics, and coordinated responses began to counteract attacks more effectively. Advanced technology, global cooperation, and human determination combined to stabilize key regions. Military units learned to anticipate patterns, volunteers adapted to new challenges, and command centers refined their decision-making in real time. Progress was slow and costly, but it was undeniable. Humanity had faced the absolute peak of danger and was holding its ground. Humanity realized the importance of preparation, coordination, adaptability, and resilience. The phase demonstrated that no single nation or individual could face such threats alone. Success depended on global unity and cooperation. It also revealed the extraordinary capacity of people to act courageously, creatively, and decisively under extreme pressure. While losses had been significant and the danger real, humanity had survived one of the most severe tests it had ever faced. The breaking point had pushed the limits of endurance, strategy, and morality, preparing the world for the next stage, the resolution where humanity would consolidate its strength and take decisive action to overcome the enemy, more than any before it. Highlighted the combination of technology, strategy, and human spirit required to survive. Every decision, every act of bravery, and every coordinated effort contributed to the collective response. The breaking point was the ultimate test, and humanity's ability to endure, adapt, and resist became the defining feature of the story. It proved that even when faced with overwhelming odds, humans could summon the courage, intelligence, and collaboration necessary to protect life, communities, and the very future of civilization. After the relentless pressure of the breaking point, humanity reached a moment where the tide began to turn. The chaos that had engulfed cities, disrupted communication, and challenged every defense system slowly gave way to a coordinated, determined response. For the first time, the combined efforts of nations, communities, and individuals began to show tangible results. The enemy, despite its overwhelming firepower and strategic precision, was now facing resistance that was stronger, faster, and more intelligent than it had anticipated. It became clear that the relentless preparation, collaboration, and courage that had been cultivated over months were paying off, and humanity had begun to assert control over the situation. At the center of this resolution was the global command network that had been established during earlier phases of preparation. Dr. Elias Hartman, along with military leaders, scientists, and strategists from around the world, had spent months refining systems, aligning strategies, and ensuring that resources could be mobilized quickly. Now, those systems were functioning at peak efficiency. Decisions were being made in real time, allowing forces to anticipate attacks, counter maneuvers, and neutralize threats before they could cause large-scale destruction. This was not just a battle of firepower, it was a battle of coordination, intelligence, and adaptability. Every successful action reinforced the morale of both troops and civilians, creating momentum that gradually shifted the balance. In humanity's favor, the resolution phase also highlighted the incredible resilience of ordinary people. Civilians, who had endured days of fear, uncertainty, and danger, were no longer merely reacting, they were actively contributing to the larger effort. Community networks coordinated the delivery of food, water, and medical supplies to areas under attack. Volunteers helped evacuate people from dangerous zones and provided critical support to medical teams. Families and neighbors organized themselves to maintain order in their neighborhoods, proving that survival depended not only on military strategy but also on human solidarity. Every small action, from helping a neighbor to assisting a relief convoy, played a role in the broader resolution of the crisis. Technology continued to be a decisive factor. Satellites and drones provided constant surveillance, tracking the enemy's movements and identifying weak points. Advanced analytics and artificial intelligence processed enormous amounts of data, allowing commanders to make informed decisions quickly. Cybersecurity teams worked tirelessly to restore communication networks and prevent further disruptions, even in the midst of a fast-moving conflict. These tools allowed humanity to respond with precision, striking the right targets at the right time and preventing further chaos. Yet, it was clear that technology alone could not have achieved this outcome. It was the people who used it, leaders, strategists, soldiers, and volunteers, who made the difference. Military operations during this phase demonstrated a new level of coordination and effectiveness. Joint forces from multiple nations worked seamlessly, using combined knowledge and experience to execute complex maneuvers. Defensive positions were reinforced, while counteroffensives targeted the enemy's most vulnerable points. Urban areas that had been under siege were gradually secured, allowing essential services to be restored. Logistics, once disrupted, were stabilized, ensuring that troops and civilians alike had access to food, water, medical care, and equipment. The resolution was not immediate or easy. It required careful planning, split-second decision, and constant adaptation, but it was clear that the coordinated effort was succeeding. One of the most remarkable aspects of this phase was the psychological transformation. Where fear and uncertainty had once dominated, hope and determination began to emerge. Soldiers gained confidence as they saw their plans succeed. Civilians felt reassured by the return of order and the presence of effective support systems, and communities found strength in collective action. Morale became a force multiplier, allowing people to continue resisting, adapting, and helping one another despite exhaustion and adversity. This shift was as important as any strategic victory, proving that resilience and optimism could influence the outcome of even the most dire circumstances. The enemy, once confident in its ability to overwhelm humanity, that began to encounter obstacles it had not fully anticipated. Coordinated defenses, rapid adaptation, and innovative tactics countered its strategies. Supply lines were disrupted, communication between hostile units was intercepted or blocked, and counterattacks forced enemy forces to retreat from critical positions. The very strategies that had once given the enemy the advantage now became vulnerabilities, as humanity exploited weaknesses with intelligence, precision, and speed. Every victory, no matter how small, reinforced the larger effort and demonstrated that preparation, coordination, and courage could overcome even the most formidable threats. During this phase, international collaboration reached its peak. Countries shared real-time intelligence, coordinated troop movements, and provided resources to regions most in need. Experts from diverse fields, military, scientific, medical, and humanitarian, worked together seamlessly, creating a global network capable of responding to multiple crises simultaneously. This unprecedented level of cooperation not only helped secure immediate victories but also laid the foundation for long-term resilience. Humanity was discovering that collective effort, guided by strong leadership and mutual trust, could achieve what no single nation or individual could accomplish alone. The resolution also involved significant humanitarian efforts. As cities and regions were secured, emergency services moved quickly to provide relief to affected populations. Medical teams treated the injured, food and water were distributed, and efforts to restore electricity and communication networks began immediately. Volunteers assisted in rebuilding shelters, clearing debris, and supporting displaced families. These efforts, coordinated alongside military operations, ensured that survival was not limited to strategic or military objectives but extended to the well-being of ordinary people. It was a holistic approach to crisis management, combining defense, recovery, and compassion in a single, integrated effort. Dr. Hartmann's leadership continued to play a crucial role. His ability to maintain focus, analyze complex situations, and guide decisions under immense pressure helped sustain the momentum of the global response. He emphasized the importance of learning from mistakes, adapting strategies, and remaining vigilant even as victories accumulated. Hartmann reminded everyone involved that resolution did not mean the end of risk. It meant that humanity had gained the advantage, and that continued effort was required to ensure lasting safety and security. His guidance inspired confidence and discipline, helping teams maintain effectiveness throughout the complex and demanding phase. The resolution phase was also marked by stories of ingenuity and resourcefulness. Engineers devised rapid repair methods to restore critical infrastructure. Military units adapted vehicles and equipment to overcome logistical challenges. Volunteers created innovative solutions for distributing aid in areas cut off by conflict. These actions highlighted the importance of human creativity and problem-solving in complementing technology and strategy. In many ways, the resolution was as much about the ingenuity and determination of ordinary people as it was about large-scale military or technological operations. Humanity had reclaimed significant control over the situation. Major cities and regions were stabilized, enemy advances had been halted, and supply lines and communication networks were restored. The combined efforts of nations, military units, communities, and individuals had turned the tide. While some challenges remained, it was clear that humanity had succeeded in defending itself and preventing catastrophic outcomes. This phase represented the culmination of preparation, resilience, and cooperation, a demonstration that even in the face of overwhelming danger, organized, intelligent, and determined action could prevail. It emphasized the necessity of global cooperation, the power of preparation, the value of adaptability, and the critical role of human courage and ingenuity. It demonstrated that threats could be countered not only with technology and firepower but also with strategy, coordination, and moral purpose. It highlighted the interplay between leadership, teamwork, and individual initiative, showing that success required both large-scale planning and small-scale acts of courage and creativity. Most importantly, it proved that humanity, when united and determined, could survive even the most relentless challenges. The world began to rebuild. Infrastructure, while damaged, was being restored. Communities were recovering, and governments were implementing measures to prevent future crises. The success of the global response created a blueprint for future collaboration, emphasizing the importance of preparedness, rapid communication, and coordinated action. Civilians and soldiers alike carried the lessons learned into the future, understanding that resilience, unity, and determination were just as important as any weapon or defense system. Humanity had faced an extraordinary test and emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. It marked the moment when humanity stopped reacting to threats and began to take decisive control. It demonstrated that preparation, courage, collaboration, and adaptability could overcome even the most relentless challenges. Every action, every decision, and every act of bravery contributed to this outcome, showing that survival was not a matter of luck but a result of deliberate, intelligent, and coordinated effort. The resolution proved that humanity, when united and determined, could not only withstand unprecedented danger but also emerge victorious, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. More than any other, highlighted the full potential of humanity when it answered the call with determination, ingenuity, and relentless effort. It was a period of triumph born from months of preparation, conflict, and struggle, a clear demonstration that, even against overwhelming odds, humans could unite, adapt, and prevail. The resolution was not simply the end of immediate danger. It was a powerful affirmation of what humanity could achieve when faced with the most serious threats. It laid the foundation for reflection, learning, and continued vigilance, ensuring that the lessons of this extraordinary moment would endure for generations to come. When the dust finally settled and the immediate danger had passed, humanity was left to face the aftermath of an extraordinary and life-changing crisis. Cities that had been damaged, infrastructure that had been disrupted, and communities that had been displaced now required rebuilding and care. The physical destruction was immense, but the human spirit, tested through months of relentless conflict, had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. In every corner of the world, people began the slow and deliberate process of recovery, reflection, and learning. The aftermath was not simply about repairing what had been broken. It was about understanding what had been learned, what could be improved, and how humanity could prepare for future challenges. In the immediate aftermath, the world was a mixture of devastation and determination. Entire neighborhoods that had been damaged by attacks or natural disasters were now sites of activity, as engineers, construction crews, and volunteers worked tirelessly to rebuild homes, hospitals, schools, and essential services. Power grids were restored, transportation networks repaired, and communication systems brought back online. Yet, amid this reconstruction, there was also a sense of cautious optimism. People knew that the crisis had tested humanity to its limits, and while scars remained both physical and emotional, the very act of survival had created a renewed sense of confidence. Humanity had faced what seemed impossible and had endured. Dr. Elias Hartman, who had guided much of the global effort throughout the crisis, now turned his attention to reflection and learning. The months of preparation, rising conflict, and eventual resolution had provided an extraordinary wealth of knowledge about how humanity responds under extreme pressure. Hartman and his team studied every aspect of the crisis: the strengths and weaknesses of military strategy, the efficiency of logistical operations, the adaptability of technology, and the courage and resilience displayed by ordinary citizens. Their goal was not simply to celebrate survival, but to understand it fully so that humanity would be better prepared for any future challenges. The lessons learned during this phase would shape global strategies for decades to come. One of the most significant realizations was the importance of unity and cooperation. The crisis had demonstrated that no single nation, organization, or group could withstand such an overwhelming challenge alone. The alliances formed during the conflict between countries, agencies, and communities had been critical to survival. Former rivals had worked together seamlessly, sharing resources, intelligence, and strategies. This unprecedented level of collaboration became a model for the future, showing that when humanity sets aside differences and focuses on a shared purpose, incredible achievements are possible. Governments began to institutionalize these alliances, creating permanent structures for global cooperation, disaster preparedness, and rapid response. Communities were transformed by the experience. Ordinary citizens who had participated in rescue efforts, relief distribution, and community support emerged with a newfound sense of empowerment. They had learned that even in the most dangerous circumstances, their actions mattered and could save lives. Local organizations that had been formed during the crisis became permanent fixtures, ensuring that communities would be better prepared for emergencies in the future. The collective effort of individuals had proven that survival was not just about strategy or firepower. It was about compassion, courage, and solidarity. The technological advancements that had been crucial during the crisis were now being assessed and improved for peacetime use. Drones, satellite systems, artificial intelligence, and rapid communication networks that had once served purely defensive purposes were adapted to assist in rebuilding and planning. Early warning systems for natural disasters were enhanced, emergency logistics were refined, and cyber defenses were strengthened to prevent future attacks. The crisis had accelerated innovation and demonstrated the practical value of technology when paired with human ingenuity. In the aftermath, the same tools that had helped humanity survive would now help it thrive, providing protection and support in everyday life. Psychological recovery became an essential part of the aftermath. People who had lived through the breaking point and the intense conflict experienced trauma, loss, and fear. Support systems were established to help individuals and families cope with the mental and emotional toll of the crisis. Counseling, community support groups, and public awareness campaigns helped address the lingering effects of stress and anxiety. At the same time, the shared experience of survival created a sense of collective identity and resilience. People had faced extraordinary danger together, and that shared history became a source of strength and unity. Education and reflection became a priority. Schools, universities, and training centers incorporated lessons from the crisis into curricula. Students learned not only about strategy, science, and technology, but also about courage, leadership, and moral responsibility. The story of humanity's response became a teaching tool, inspiring future generations to think critically, act decisively, and value cooperation. Dr. Hartman and other leaders documented every phase of the conflict, ensuring that knowledge gained would not be lost. This emphasis on learning and preparation created a culture of resilience that extended far beyond immediate recovery efforts. Economically, the world faced significant challenges, but recovery efforts were guided by the same principles that had driven survival. Resources were allocated efficiently. Global aid networks ensured equitable distribution, and reconstruction projects focused on both speed and long-term stability. Investments were made not only to restore what had been lost, but also to improve infrastructure, making it more resilient against future threats. Economies that had been disrupted began to stabilize as industries adapted, communities rebuilt, and trade resumed. The aftermath was both a test of resourcefulness and a demonstration of human perseverance. In addition to the physical and psychological rebuilding, there was a profound moral and philosophical reflection. Humanity had faced the brink of disaster and emerged victorious, but the cost had been high. Millions of lives had been affected, and countless people had sacrificed everything to ensure the survival of others. Leaders, strategists, and ordinary citizens alike reflected on the meaning of courage, responsibility, and collective effort. The crisis had underscored the interconnectedness of all people, the fragility of civilization, and the extraordinary potential for human ingenuity and compassion. These reflections influenced policies, education, and community values, shaping a more conscious and resilient society. Global governance and preparedness structures were significantly improved in the aftermath. International bodies were strengthened to ensure rapid coordination during emergencies. Response protocols were standardized across borders, and communication networks were made more robust. The world recognized that survival depended not only on individual nations but on coordinated global action. Policies were developed to maintain collaboration even in times of tension, ensuring that the alliances forged during the crisis would persist. This long-term approach reflected the understanding that threats could arise at any time, and humanity needed systems in place to respond quickly and effectively. Stories of heroism and resilience from the crisis became part of collective memory. Soldiers, volunteers, scientists, and ordinary citizens who had risked their lives to save others were celebrated and remembered. These stories served as inspiration, reminding people that even in the darkest hours, courage, empathy, and determination could make a difference. Monuments, memorials, and commemorative events honored those who had sacrificed, while narratives in literature, film, and education preserved the lessons of the crisis. Humanity recognized that its survival was not just a product of strategy and technology, but also of the human spirit in communities across the globe. The experience led to stronger bonds and renewed civic engagement. People understood the value of working together, helping neighbors, and supporting collective goals. Volunteer networks, disaster preparedness organizations, and local councils grew in influence and capacity. Ordinary citizens became more aware of their role in maintaining resilience, and a culture of mutual support flourished. The crisis had not only tested humanity but also strengthened it, proving that collective effort, empathy, and courage were as essential to survival as firepower and strategy. Reflecting on the crisis, Dr. Hartman emphasized several key principles that had guided success. Preparation, coordination, adaptability, and resilience were essential, but so were courage, moral responsibility, and human ingenuity. Technology was invaluable, but it was the people who directed it, made decisions, and acted in the face of danger who determined the outcome. The lessons learned extended beyond military or scientific applications. They applied to everyday life, governance, education, and community organization. Humanity's ability to survive and thrive was a combination of preparation, strategy, and the extraordinary capacity of people to act with determination and compassion. As time passed, the aftermath of the crisis became a foundation for long-term progress. Societies rebuilt stronger and smarter, integrating lessons from the conflict into urban planning, infrastructure design, and emergency management. Governments, organizations, and communities implemented strategies to prevent future disasters and ensure rapid, coordinated responses when challenges arose. Education systems incorporated the history, science, and moral lessons of the crisis, ensuring that future generations would inherit knowledge and resilience. The crisis had tested humanity to its limits, but it had also illuminated the path forward, a path defined by cooperation, courage, and the relentless pursuit of preparedness. In a broader sense, the aftermath was also a moment of reflection on humanity's place in the world. The crisis had demonstrated both the fragility and the strength of civilization. Natural disasters, technological threats, and human conflict had the power to disrupt life profoundly, yet the combined efforts of people around the globe had restored order and security. The experience reinforced the importance of stewardship, foresight, and collective responsibility. Humanity had been tested, and the outcome revealed a species capable of extraordinary resilience, intelligence, and compassion when it chose to act together. The aftermath phase ultimately became a story of hope, learning, and empowerment. It was a period in which humanity not only recovered from the immediate crisis but also strengthened its foundations for the future. The experience highlighted the importance of unity, preparation, and adaptability, while also celebrating the courage, creativity, and compassion that had enabled survival. Every lesson learned, every act of bravery, and every coordinated effort contributed to a more resilient world. Humanity had faced one of the most serious threats in its history and had emerged not just intact but wiser, stronger, and more prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. Dr. Hartman, in his reflections, often emphasized that the crisis had shown the best of humanity. Despite fear, loss, and uncertainty, people had risen to the occasion, demonstrating courage, intelligence, and empathy. Leaders had made difficult decisions with integrity. Scientists had innovated under pressure, and ordinary citizens had acted heroically in their communities. The aftermath was a reminder that the survival of humanity depended not only on technology, strategy, or resources, but on the collective character, resilience, and moral courage of its people. It was a lesson that would endure for generations, shaping how humans approached both threats and opportunities in the future. In the final analysis, the aftermath and reflection phase was a time of rebuilding, learning, and honoring the extraordinary efforts that had saved the world. Physical infrastructure was restored, communities healed, and global systems were improved to prevent future crises. Psychological and social recovery reinforced resilience and unity, while education and reflection ensured that lessons would be remembered. Most importantly, humanity emerged with a renewed understanding of its capabilities and responsibilities. The experience had been harrowing, but it had revealed the extraordinary potential of humans to confront danger with courage, intelligence, and collective effort. The world had survived, learned, and grown stronger, ready to face whatever the future might hold with unwavering resolve.